OK. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à l'espace 4, l'installation de l'Université Concordia. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui pour Bridging Generations, a conversation with our elders. L'événement aujourd'hui est diffusé en direct à l'espace 4 et situé en territoire autochtone non cédé. And just to help situate you, we're streaming to YouTube live from ForSpace. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands, Tchitchaga, Montreal. À l'espace 4, nous travaillons avec la communauté universitaire pour favoriser la mobilisation du savoir. And here at ForSpace, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities. La rencontre aujourd'hui est une conversation en direct en Zoom aussi. Vous pouvez donc soumettre vos questions, vos commentaires par le clavardage. We're running this event as a live stream Zoom meeting also, so we welcome comments and questions via the chat if you're joining us there. Et pour les personnes qui sont dans la salle, si vous souhaitez participer, il suffit de lever la main et nous vous fournirons un micro. For those of you here in the space, if you have any questions later on, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. Okay, with that, it's very much my pleasure to hand it over to the Director of Operation and Implementation for the Equity Office, James Roach. James, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us for an intergenerational conversation as we bring together Black community elders to share their wisdom, life lessons, and guidance with Concordia's Black students and community members in a panel discussion. This special event will also pay tribute to the late Dr. Clarence Bayne, a professor, activist, and co-founder of the Black Theater Workshop. Following the panel event, we invite you to a reception at NULA, the NULA Center for Black Students, starting at 4:30, where you can continue the conversation and network over refreshments. And this unique event is an opportunity for students and community members to connect with the change makers of Montreal's Black community and learn from their shared experiences and celebrate their vital role in shaping our collective future. Welcome.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being here, especially to our guests. I am so excited to be introducing you to everyone. We have quite some distinguished guests. So first, we have Brenda Paris. Brenda is an experienced educator and social justice advocate, known for her work in business, government, and community development. She has championed gender, youth, and community capacity building, moving these issues to the forefront of her work. As a director on the board of the Montreal Urban Transport Corporation, she has advanced initiatives in diversity, environmental responsibility, and workplace integration for ethnocultural and visible minority employees. Brenda also co-founded the Black and Third World Student Affairs Department at Dawson College to promote student success and serve as a trainer on the gender-based analysis for the status of women in Canada. She's also served on the Provincial Parole Commissioner, contributing to the civil policy as president of the mayor's political party, and provided advisory support to Montreal's official opposition. Today, Brenda consults in feminist theories, health and well-being, strategic mentoring, and cultural heritage. Thank you so much, Brenda, for coming. And then we have Mr. Frantz Voltaire, who is a Haitian-born historian, author, and filmmaker with an extensive background in political science, international relations, and history. He's earned degrees from institutions in Chile and Canada and has contributed significantly to the study of Black history and the Haitian diaspora. Voltaire has published influential works, including Black Power in Haiti, A Brief History of Blacks in Canada, and produced award-winning documentaries like Puerto Príncipe Mío and Les Chemins de la Mémoire. As founder of the Centre International de Documentation d'Information Haïtienne, Caribéenne, et Afro-canadienne in Montreal, he has established Canada's only Francophone research center focused on the Black communities. Voltaire has also co-founded the Montreal's Human Rights Film Festival and the Action Week Against Racism, serving as a prominent voice in the anti-racism advocacy and the Haitian cultural documentation. And currently, would you like to share what's happening right across the hall?
Yes.
If you'd like to take the mic to be able to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. Very kind. But we have an exhibit in the gallery in front of this place, and it's an exhibit by Ezri Mondesir. Black is an Haitian artist, visual artist, but also we have an exhibit on the first Haitian writers who arrived in Montreal in the 60s. And so you have two exhibits, and it's free. And so you have to exhibit. You can just look at, and it's open, I think, from.
I believe it's open. We have today an event starting at 5:30.
Yes.
So if you like to join, it'll be then.
Any day that I think the exhibit will last until January 18.
And we have, last but not least, Nigel Thomas, who's originally from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is a celebrated author, academic, and essayist who moved to Canada in 1968. Educated at Concordia, McGill, and Université de Montréal, he has taught English and French in Montreal schools and later became a professor of US literature at Université Laval. With a prolific writing career, Thomas had authored 6 novels, 3 short fiction collections, 2 poetry collections, and 2 literary criticism books. His notable works, Lives and Whole and Otherwise, and Behind the Faces of Winter, has been translated into French and is known for his insightful exploration of reality. Thomas describes his writing as an effort to look beyond the masks of reality and uncover deeper truths. Thank you all for coming, and we're very excited to begin.
Thank you very much.
This conversation, as we hope to gain wisdom and knowledge from your experiences. And we really hope for this is a moment for you to communicate to students, to youth, to the community, what you know now, to what you wish you knew then. So essentially, my first question seeks to contextualize your experiences as youth. And so we'll begin with the panels closest to me. My first question is as individuals deeply rooted in community activism, looking back at your experience as youth, what similarities and differences do you see in the experiences of the younger generation of today? That's for you.
Okay.
So pass it along.
When I arrived here, I arrived from Chile in 1973. And so it was the year after the first Haitian organization like Maison d'Haïti and the Bureau de la Communauté Chrétienne des Haïtiennes Montréal were organized to help migrants from Haiti who arrived here. Most of them were, or most of them were illiterate at the time. And so this organization tried to help the people who arrived here to get informed about their rights. And at the time, most of them didn't have permanent residency. And so there were also a lot of young people, when they arrived here, they told them that they were not really Francophone, but they accept them as Francophone. And we have to convince the people at the time that most of the people were Creolophone. And so you have to have some class of francisation to help them. At the time, because the first Haitian who arrived here from the 1925 to 1970, most of them were people from a middle-class background. They were professionals who arrived here. And so the ministers of education or health, public health, think all the Haitians were Francophone, all the Haitians were professional. It was not the case. And so it was the first organization to help the people to establish themselves. And I have an homage to Madame Chancy. She had studied in Jamaica. She was the first one with Dr. Elder Thébault, whose wife were from Grenada, and there are maybe the few of them who speak English, and they established the contacts with the Caribbean English-speaking people, but also with the Afro-Canadian who are established here. And so this organization means they organize in 2 ways. One, to help migrants, but secondly, they have a cultural program for the young people to help them understand where they come from, to help them confront racism, the racism here. And we, in 1983, we decided to organize the Center CIDIHCA 10 years after, because our first activity were conference about ethnicity, racism, and society, because people were talking about racism, but there was not really an understanding of how racism operates in this country. And so for me, this conference was important. And secondly, we think there were in the, I can say, the Haitian community, and the Haitian community became, from the 1970 to today, the main Black community. Mm-hmm. Today, maybe we're talking about 200,000 people with Haitian background since 1925 for the first arrival of the people. And so we think that it was necessary to have a documentation center. Today, 40 years later, the center is 30,000 books on Black topics, Haitian topics, Afro-Canadian topics, but also a huge collection of photographs. And we used to organize for the, maybe before the last 10 years, also an exhibit with Webster Library to show the people some photographs. We use also to, I saw you in front of us from the Black Theater Workshop. And
yes,
my friend, Dr. Clarence Bayne, we were together in some activities, and we organized some events. And it was very important to have a Caribbean perspective, not only to be too parochial, because most of the communities are parochial. You have Jamaican, Barbados, Haitians. And so it's important to have a global perspective, not only about the Caribbean, but also about the Afro-Canadian.
Absolutely. And my apologies, I forgot the order of the agenda, and I would like to thank you so much for mentioning Dr. Clarence Bayne. And before we continue on with the questions, I would like to bring up Andrea Springer from the Black Theater Workshop board president to introduce the video for the tribute for Dr. Clarence Bayne. Please come up.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'd also like to invite my colleague, Ms. Yvonne Greer, who's also a member of the BTW board. Dr. Clarence Bayne was an educator professionally, but brought this attribute to every corner of his life.
Born in Trinidad and Tobago, he attended university in British Columbia before moving to Montreal to complete his PhD in economics at McGill University. He started at Sir George Williams University as a guest lecturer in 1966, then assistant professor in 1968, associate professor at the new Concordia University in 1974, and full professor in 2001. He was the director of the former graduate diploma program in administration, which highlighted his understanding of the lack of administrative training opportunities for nonprofit administrators.
So for Black Theater Workshop, he was a founder, executive director, and continued to be an active member of the board of directors until his passing. He's made countless contributions to ensure the voice and legacy of BTW far extends the 54 years that currently positions us as Canada's longest running Black theater company. Dr. Bayne has been BTW's, and by extension, Montreal's English language theater community's greatest advocate and supporter, dedicating countless hours and resources to its success. Balancing his involvement with numerous other companies and associations, he has consistently not only opened doors and uplifted others, but through his life of advocacy, ensured that those doors remained open. He led the board of directors, many of whom are with us here today, and impact on our community. Please join me as we take a look and listen to what some of our community leaders have said about Dr. Bayne in this short commemorative video.
We've lost a tremendous voice in the community.
University professor, theater producer, trailblazer.
He believed in our voices.
Wherever he went, if you were bright and smart and showed promise, and if you had skills, he was pulling you to do something or another for Black Theatre Workshop. His devotion to his community was exceeded only by his devotion to his family.
Again, my first memory is of Dr. Bayne is when I worked at the Black Study Center and did graphics for the Black Theatre Workshop. The thing that I remember most is that he saw in me and in my art a lot more than I saw on my own. He was one of the people actually who basically, allowed me to I guess share my art with the Black community.
I first met Clarence Bayne back in 1975, almost 50 years ago. And Black Theatre Workshop was doing one of their early productions, I think it was called Dance Bongo. And I was participating in that production. And even though it was a small production, you could see the inspiration he instilled in the members of that production, the dedication. And if memory serves me right, we were short a dancer. And Clarence Bayne, even though he was president of Black Theatre Workshop, stepped in as one of the dancers. So Clarence Bayne, university professor, trailblazer, and dancer.
I think he was more dedicated to his community than he was to his teaching, actually. But he did a good job of that because they kept him and he did well by his students. But he was very, very dedicated to the community.
Think about what drives people to start the work of being in the arts and making such phenomenal change in the world is mainly because you see where the gap is and you know that you have the ability to fill it. And if in his generation, he would have been coming from a place where Black people had a voice and self-agency, and then moving to a place like Canada and specifically Quebec, where that fight was to be won all over again. So I think it's just a really clear vision of where we could be and where we should be, and the ability to actually see it and then make it happen. I think that he was actively creating the world he wanted to live in.
The thing that a lot of people don't know is that he rarely, if ever, got paid for what he did. He was paying for the meals often when there were meetings. If a bill or the association, whatever group, but in particular Black Theatre Workshop, he threw in from his pocket.
There are times when I first joined the board and I would open my emails on the way to work, on the bus, and I would see, oh, there's an email from Clarence written at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And they weren't just one-liners. They were long emails. So he definitely had a lot to say when something came to him, and sometimes he even sent a poem that was about whatever topic we discussed. So he was very a deep thinker.
He wanted to be encompassing. He didn't want to be isolationist. He didn't want to be, this is us and this is ours and so forth. It was, this is ours, but come share. Look,
very much like, Carifest and so forth. It's, it's our expression, it's our, but, you can come, and enjoy it. And, there's some value in some of these works that, that if it's seen through our eyes, might have a different or an additional level to it. So he was always wanting to explore that and look for ways and new ways to bring our community out and bring other communities in.
He was involved in everything in the Black community, and every now and then he would remind us that he had to write his thesis. He used to say his thesis because he was finishing up his PhD at McGill. But that didn't stop him from puttering around the Black community and helping us with everything that we were doing.
Some were days before the April 1st check, and we had already borrowed tons of money, thinking this check is coming. And we were told, I think it was at the funding officer level, that they're not sending the check anymore. He decided to call the Prime Minister's office very loud. And Clarence talked with his hand. Tell Mulrooney I said, don't send that check. And we will tell the boys and girls in the street, sell your drugs, do your crime. Then when you make your monies, you buy back your respectability. The Kennedys did it. The Brofmans do it. So they will be able to do it too. Betty and I are in horror. I'm petrified. Within 2 weeks, the check came.
I also saw him as a teacher, not just in the professional manner, as in the sense that he was a professor, but just a teacher, a life coach, a teacher of life. I felt that his conversations, there was always some sort of nugget. He was always trying to share and impart some sort of wisdom. He was always very frequently taking us back to the past. And there was something there that he was always trying to explain to help guide me along the way.
He was a very family-oriented person. Clarence was some of everything. He was an academic, he was an innovator, he was a go-getter. He never took no for an answer, and he was always expecting excellence from everyone who was working with him. And one of his favorite expressions was, even if we're not being paid for this work is important. And it's even more important sometimes than the work for which we have been paid.
For me, he has been a mentor in the sense of understanding your duty to some extent as a black person, black individual within the community we live in. That you have to be engaged, whether it's small or big, but you have to be involved. You have to show up. When I look at Rockhead Street in the southwest portion of Montreal, that was his work. That was his work, to have a street named after a prominent Black person because we contributed and matter.
I'm still getting over hearing or getting that phone call from Pat. Her words on the other end was, yeah, this is the call I never wanted to make. And I knew what had happened. And there's something that has really been lost in his passing. But at the same time, there's a legacy that can never be denied. Black Theatre Workshop in particular is celebrating its 54th year. it's 54 years of Clarence. I mean, he was involved right to the very end. He was still on the board of directors. Thank you. Thank you for your mentorship. Thank you for your faith. And thank you for everything that you believed in and loved about Black Theatre Workshop and how you put that into action.
Without a doubt, Clarence will be missed because as an innovator, he organized so many important events in our community, so many important organizations that are still contributing. Only last week, I got the weekly letter from the organization that he put in place to write a weekly summary of events for the Black community. And without Clarence, I wonder what's going to happen to all of these special projects of his, because he monitored them and he wanted to ensure that they lived on.
There are many people here who are going to carry on that torch, that brilliant torch that you lit, that lit up the city. There are so many people who are going to carry that torch for you. Thank you for everything that you've done, Claire.
Dr. Clarence Bayne will be greatly missed by the Black Theatre Workshop community.
They've lost a tremendous voice in the.
And our team remains determined to honor his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful tribute to someone who's going to be greatly missed and has left a huge impact in Montreal's Black community. Thank you so much for sharing all of the work. It's incredible. Going back to what you mentioned about the need for a Afro-Canadian perspective, I wanted to talk to you, Brenda, about your experience. You were born and raised here in Montreal. Do you think Black youth has more access to that Afro-Canadian perspective than you did growing up?
Absolutely. I grew up, it was 100% Haitian, all Black, but that's many years later. So I grew up really in isolation, I would say. And some people ask me, did you have fun when you were young? I didn't, because racism, from the time I was 5 years old, I remember going out to the bus stop and there was a divide. There was the French students on one side and the English on the other side. And they would call me all the way to school, Nigres, Nigres, mange la merde. Those are the first French words that I learned as a youngster. And I once came across a poem, which I don't have, but and it's by an anonymous poet who wrote, the little girl is standing at the bus stop, all in her little dress and waiting to go to school or church, whatever. And a car goes by and calls her Nigres, and she freezes. And that poem, which I have hidden away somewhere in a box, not because I wanted to hide it, but because it's just there. But it so represented me in those days. Mm-hmm. So today, fast forward. So hence, let me do a thing in between. As I went on with my elementary school and then high school, which was the same thing, there was a famous group, that had a choir. Anyway, there was maybe 5 or 6 Black people in Rosemount High School at the time. And then I'm a graduate, I'm an alumni of Concordia here. So later on, while working, I went to Concordia at night and got my degree, and then some graduate work as well. But when I was hired by Dawson College, which was in 1970, the CIDIHCA system came into being in 1969. And very shortly after, I had the privilege of co-founding the Black and Third World Student Affairs Department with a coalition of staff, students, and teachers. And that was because of the electric things and enormous engagement of students at the time and community, because Sir George Williams had just happened, the Sir George affair, computer affair. It had happened shortly before that, 1968. And so with that, it was a catalyst for us to create this department. And just today, as I walked in here, somebody came up to me and said, Brenda, I want to talk to you. I was in Dawson in the 70s and went on and on and on. And coincidentally as well, I had the first meeting yesterday with just 3 people, 2 from Dawson and myself. I'm no longer there, but we are going to do a tribute in next year for 50 years later of Black and Third World Student Affairs Department, the archives of which are non-existent at Dawson College. I have to say. So it's the untold stories here again, and repeats itself again and again and again and again. Also, I'm just going to fast when Frantz talked about Adeline Chauncey, she was one of the first persons that I met during my young activist years, I'd say, you know. And I remember doing karate in her basement, her and her husband, teaching young people, you know, how to kind of self-defense, but not in an aggressive way, you know, just that you could arm yourself politically through the written word and also physically, you know. So it wasn't a whole thing, but a lot of different experiences happened in the 70s that were very, 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 very special to Black community in general, and for students and youth in particular.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I can't believe it's already been 50 years you're going to be celebrating the creation of the Black and Third World Department. Wow, 50 years.
50 years. And like she walked in here and like just like it was yesterday and talked about the group that came and the experiences, and she was laughing and saying, no, this was so much fun, you know. And fun and learning. And I know we shared something before about having fun versus learning. It was all encompassing because it was race. It was a proud moment for students to be proud of themselves. We would take trips to the States and so on, just exposed in all kinds of levels, as well as being involved in the community here, you know. And even Clarence was a part of that too. So it was really all encompassing. I feel very privileged to have lived this long in Montreal because I had so many experiences with so many wonderful people that were engaged and taught us and been involved in the struggles along the way.
And so have any of you 3 met in the 70s and the 80s, or have you ever worked together? Sorry, yeah, we'll start with the...
Well, I certainly know Frantz. I've met him. I may have interacted with the Haitian community, but I know Frantz probably because we were engaged in literary activities. And I've certainly met Brenda. But though I think I met you through the bookstore rather than through anything else.
The Liberation Bookstore?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was a long time ago as well. So. Sure, yeah. We were elders, don't forget. You want to talk about the Liberation Bookstore? Anyway, not. Well, the Liberation Bookstore was foundational to so many people in Montreal because actually my brother, Michael Paris, along with Victor Phillips, who was also part of the theater group, I would say, réseau, before Black Theater Workshop, way, way back, the Negro Theater Guild. But he sponsored my brother to create the Black Liberation Bookstore, which was on Maisonneuve Street, which housed actually, you know, the bookstore at the time for the academia here. So, but it served as a meeting place, the bookstore. You want to talk a bit about all that? Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say that, well, Victor certainly was seminal in many respects. You know, he actually founded a readers group, the Black, no, I'm talking about your uncle, Victor. Victor Phillips. Oh yeah, I see. Yeah,
the audience,
he's your uncle actually.
Clarify.
Yeah, and so I actually, that's right, I met him through that reading group, Black Literary Guild, where in fact I tested out some of my early writing. And we certainly read probably some of the best books most of them were African American. There were so few Anglophone Black writers here at the time, Austin Clarke, And eventually George Eliot Clark, but not much more than that. Quavers was part of that group. He was a librarian at High School of Montreal. His wife was the librarian actually at Westmount as well. Williams Wallace had just begun publishing, and so we read some of those books that she brought out. Yeah, that's sort of my literary contribution to the discussion.
That's incredible. Please, I hope everyone's writing things down. If you want clarifications, you'll have a time to ask your questions at that time, because you mentioned a lot of names that I would love. Can't get into it right now, but I'd love to get into it afterwards. So.
Just on that note, I did meet Frantz way back, just when even before you created the CIDIHCA, and as well, you know, Noel. So yeah, we go back and we've shared many things along the way, literary and otherwise, I would say. Yes.
And in fact, in 1982, we began to meet at the Caribbean Center of the University of Montreal. Was maybe the first university to have a Caribbean Center, because in McGill, I worked with Carrie Levitt, who was at the time with the CDS, if I remember, Center for Development, was essentially a center, an economic and anthropological center at McGill. Most of the works were on the Caribbean. Some are on Africa, but most of them were on the Caribbean. And when we were working with the Caribbean Center, I was teaching at the time at UQAM, and we know that they want to close the center, the Caribbean Center of the University of Montreal. We didn't understand that, because it was the time when you have a lot of migrants who arrive here. And we said, how dare they can close the center at the moment where you have a lot of people you need some study, some research on education, on health, public health. And we decide at the time with a lot of people who were involved with this Caribbean Center at the University of Montreal to build a center. And we decide not to build it in the university. We decide to have a center who will be an interface between the community and the university, where people who are involved in activism in different organizations, sometimes they don't have access to knowledge. And so this was the reason why we built this center. 40 years later, we still organize research. We still have relation with all the universities not only in Montreal, but also with York, in Toronto, with Laval, and with some international university, because we began to work on the global Caribbean, because we understand that today the problem is not only in Montreal, but also in Canada, and more with what happened with Black people. I remember this meeting with Robinson, who was this African Center in Washington, and when he said to the Black sportmen, he said, you are billionaires or millionaires sometimes, you have a giraffe in your garden, but look at what is happening in Africa and in the Caribbean. And so you have a responsibility to the people and to engage yourself and with your money to help these centers, because, you know, racism in all over the Americas, in the Atlantic world, is permanent. I can say that we have to fight racism, but we have to confront racism. And when we organized our first activity was essentially, I think it was the first or one of the first meeting on race and society in Quebec. Because you have maybe some activities in the Anglosphere, we can say, but in the Francosphere, you don't have a reflection on that. I remember the first book on slavery in Quebec was by Marcel Trudel. Fortunately, he lives enough to see recognition. But he told me at the time when he was writing his dissertation at Université Laval, they tried to tell him not to write on these topics. And in fact, his professional activity was in Ottawa and not in Quebec. I'm saying that when we look at today, we see a lot of change. We have, for example, now some representation on the political sphere. But at the time, when they were building this, when the mayor of Montreal put a limit to the, for example, to the Chinese neighborhood, telling that he doesn't want that the Chinese are more space in the city. It was very difficult at the time, but you have a lot of people like Dr. Baynes, like Max Chancy, like a lot of people who fight that we can have some change. But you, the new generation, you have to build on their legacy. And for that reason, we said, okay, one friend of mine who died, and he wrote a book, Silencing the Past, that if we don't tell our own stories, fiction, essays, our own story, we didn't exist. If we don't have our own archives, that people decide for us. And I will finish with this word. I remember with my friend Howard Dodson, who was the director of Schomburg Center in New York City. Used to have a lot of contacts with them. And he said when Arthur Schomburg built his collection, it was, he said, at the beginning of the 20th century, he said, when I look for the Black presence in New York, you have to go to essentially on music, sport, and sport, it begins in the 50s, or you got crime. You don't find any Blacks. And he began to build a center with a repository today for mainly all the works on Blacks all over the world. I think it was an inspiration for me because Howard was some kind of a mentor. And I said, okay, we have to build this kind of center. But we know that we exist for the last 40 years. We can find some grants, but we never find never a seed money, never a money for the library or for the archives. We can find to organize an exhibit, to organize an event, but, and for the people of the Black Theater Workshop, if you remember, we organized at some moment with art, the word of in the artistic world, because at the Art Council of Canada, we receive very few, but I said very few money, and they ask you to have the same kind of activities, then people will receive 10, 12, 20 times more money than you. And this is some kind of systemic racism in the sense. They give you $10,000, they give the other one 100, and they said, okay, you don't have the same project than the others. I remember that we were maybe 20 organizations. We organized, and finally, they decide to open the founding for us in the artistic community, but it was a huge coalition of Asian groups, Black groups, Arabics. We were involved in that. And I see the change in some institutions, but also other institutions are more reluctant to change, like the police force. Like I want every Black History Month I used to go to the penitentiary system, and you look at the presence of autochthone and Blacks in the system. You can see also, for example, last year, in the 25th anniversary of the Week Against Racism. This is a program we have for the last 25 years, and more than 800,000 people assist at different activities, 88 activities.
Wow.
But when we, for the first time, we organized last year, this year, it was in March, this activity with the First Nation in the institution, in the Quebec institution. Sometimes they were reluctant because they said, no, 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 deal with immigrants, deal with minorities, but not with the autochthone. And I have to give an homage to Ghislain Picard, who is in our council. Ghislain Picard, the chief of the First Nation, and Ghislain has this vision that we have to build a coalition where the First Nation have to be there, because racism begins with the First Nation and with the first slave who were brought to Americans. And we have to build some kind of coalition thinking about that.
Absolutely. And you have started the work of and you've left such an incredible legacy, of course. And I would like to ask Mr. Thomas, in terms of looking at the next generation and looking at your legacy, how do you see them taking your work forward? Or how would you like them to take your work forward?
I'm wondering what my legacy is.
Want me to read it to you, your bio?
No, not at all, not at all, not at all. I mean, my bio is sort of there for the public. I mean, I certainly have a completely different view of what my legacy, if there's such a thing, is. Well, I guess as a writer, interrogating what I see as humanity, I would certainly like other people to continue this sort of thing. I think of people who are. Let me begin a bit further back and talk about activism. We certainly have battles to fight for equality. This world is built largely on injustice, largely because we, as human beings, we love power, and greed is huge as a motivator. And generally speaking, we're looking for those whom we can oppress, and we have to wage a war against that. And so I try to do that obliquely through fiction. But one can do that for sure in one's life in terms of what one confronts. Long before I started writing, or before my works got published, I should say, I was certainly concerned about what was going on, certainly in the high school system where I worked. And there was a lot of racism in the school system during my time. And you quite clearly had to decide whether at a certain point you were going to put your job on the line. You know, some people know this. I remember one afternoon being in the staff room, and the fellow who still lives here in Montreal came to the staff room, and he said, "Mr. Thomas, come quick." Miss, whatever her name was, told the class that they were behaving like a bunch of niggers. You had that sort of situation. Later on, this was in 78, later on in the 80s, you had teachers who felt that they could hit Black kids and so on. So you really had to just simply say, no, you're not going to do that. And and simply stand up and do that sort of thing. Well, you do that in real life, but I've also converted some of those experiences into fiction and so on. Now, in terms of legacy, what can I say? Continue fighting. My experience was somewhat different in the late 70s, for example. QBB existed, the Quebec Board of Black Educators. But in 79, I left QBB. I had quite a quarrel with one of the executive members on a situation of principle, and just decided that I just no longer wanted to be part of the organization. But QBB was doing a lot of very good work. And included in that work was tutoring kids on Saturdays. I continued to tutor kids, but I refused to belong to the organization. Yeah. I'm not sure I would, if it were today, that's one of your questions. If it were today, I probably wouldn't have left the organization. But in those days, you know, you're younger and you're driven by your ideal conviction. Exactly. And so, yeah, I think I'll just let the others talk on the subject and come back to your questions.
Sounds good. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would
continue to fight. That's basically what I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll love to hear more about your experience and you know, sticking with your convictions, what you should continue fighting with, and what you think maybe your energy could be spent elsewhere and make a bigger impact. And so, Brenda, I would love to know, in your experience and your legacy that you're working on, you mentioned things like there's lack of archives, the lack of knowledge and documentation of your work over the last 50 years, and the work of the Black and Third World Center. So I'm wondering, what part of your legacy would you want the Black youth to bring forward and to continue working on?
Well, let me just back up a bit about the founding of the Black and Third World Student Affairs Department, which was founded because there was a Black woman who had registered for the nursing department, and she was accepted on her first day. She came to class with her baby, and they wouldn't let her in, and they banned her from the program. So that was the catalyst that started. That's why we campaigned, we sent flyers, we met with the DG and all kinds of knocked down doors at Dawson to have that department created, which wasn't easy in 1971. But Paul Gallagher was the first DG of the CIDIHCA, and I guess he was dedicated to the idea of open doors, you know, in the sense, and community and so on. So we were able to break him down and get him to actually create this department for us. So I just wanted to give that little history. The other thing I wanted to say too, just fast forward to this week, and this is part of the students of today, or the young people, or anybody who wants to be an activist today. The National Assembly, I think I got this right, but they actually passed a motion yesterday or the day before to say all the elected officials are not racist. Can you imagine that in 2024? So this topic today means our legacies and all the work that still has to be done is absolutely, can you imagine? It was on CBC, it's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm gonna go back to 1968, which is when I went to May 1968. I stumbled into Paris, but at the time there was the huge diasporic workers and students strike. It shut down the whole of France and so on and so forth. And that began my political, foray into being Black, I would say, being a Black activist. So it started back then. And when I went there, I came back in 3 weeks, a changed person. So, and that was the beginning. May 1968, I had that privilege, but it was pivotal for me. So basically what I've done, from, I would say, started with Sir George Williams University Student Affairs, Computer Affair, started with that, my involvement with that. Then it went on to doing Dawson for 15 years. and talk about, just ostracized at Dawson College for 50 years, for 15 years, ostracized. So I just can't wait. I mean, I was there for 25 years and I went back to teach English and all that. I have a long history of working there, but not recognized. They didn't recognize. And they do have the student association. They have something called a legacy, and so on. But so I started with that. And then I went on to early in the 70s, there was an organization that was really founded in the States, which was called the African Liberation Support Committee. So there was a branch here in Montreal. I became the secretary, gathered monies for the liberation movements, and then went to Africa to give these monies to the liberation, right across East and West, ANC, PAIGC, all the liberation movements that you knew at the time. And so that was another part, which I consider that part of my legacy in the sense that this happened and it was, many people were involved here and, so it goes on. So after that, I did a little bit of community work. After I finished with Dawson, I did community work with the BCRC, which I'm so proud to say, 20 years later, because I was there 20 years ago, they've really advanced and morphed into so many wonderful things. And for an organization, it's not easy for community organizations to exist, period, because they don't get funding, i.e. granting, get grants and appropriate grants and so on and so forth. But they've been around for a long, long time. And Clarence Bayne was on the board of Black Theater Workshop as well and stayed there just until, I think he was there until he passed. I'm not sure, but I think so. And so for BCRC, which is young people that run it now, and it's really, I'm really very proud of the work that they're doing. So they're a model, I would say, for young people that, you could check them out if some people don't already know about them. But so that's one thing that after BCRC, well, at the same time, I became involved in politics. So I was approached to be in run for the mayor's political prize. Oh, no, I don't do politics. I just do community work. And finally, I did do it, which was kind of horrendous, but it was certainly was a learning curve. And I would, there's some people say, don't go into, like people around me would say, don't do that, they're going to destroy you. But there's some other people who have been there for like 30 years or whatever. Some other people have come out of it because of the harassment, social media and all that. It gets more, sort of another era, but there's also people who can make it, but you can make a difference, in your own way if you do. So it's not a no, it's you have to have a strong back, but I would say that it's part of community work, it's part of activism, it's part of moving things, as we just witnessed with, the elections in the States, which didn't end the way anybody wanted, but boy, did she ever, Kamala gave it a good shot and it mobilized people. When I was involved in politics, the most important thing was the people that came forth to sign up to help. The first time I ran, it's like 100 people just came forward. I didn't even have to say anything. And it was not about winning or losing. It was the fact that people wanted change and they were willing to put their heart and soul into it and do the work to effect change. I lost twice, didn't matter. The second time was the same thing. People who came forth, who were dedicated in this community here to make a difference. Racism abounded in the politics, of course, they did. And I lived that, but I wouldn't trade that as such because it was part of this whole learning curve, part of engagement, part of change agent, all those things. So that's what
I just want to add that Clarence Bayne played a seminal role in the establishment of the BCRC. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It wasn't mentioned, I just wanted to say that.
When we are talking about legacy, I will try to explain in French. Because, no, but I will translate also.
Oh non, ça va.
Okay. Because on Monday, we have an activity each Monday with young people when we try to explain historical events. And I act as a mentor. And someone said, okay, you are an elder. Yes, I'm more than 76 years old. I'm more than 76 years old. And so I'm not so young. But I hope to live more than that because my mother will be 104
wow.
On Saturday. And And so someone said, oh, you're still in this kind of activities. I said, you know, as they said I said, j'ai fait un pacte avec le combat et pas avec la victoire. I made a pact with the fighting and not with victory necessary. I think we enter in a new era with the Trump government and at global level, and maybe also at local level. And so we have to think that we expect on the 60s that things will be better, but we know that we have to continue the fighting, either for women's rights, either for LGBT, either for minority, Black, First Nation. This is a fight. I don't know when we'll be finished, but we have to think that for the last 500 years since colonization, Blacks, First Nation, mostly, they were concerned with resistance. And it is the main word for me, resistance. Resistance means that not only with resilience, but also an act of defiance. We have to think about these people who live in, our ancestors, who lives in very, very problems, with very deep problems, like people living in slavery and fighting. And so it's as they said in French, c'est un combat. And so we have to continue the fighting. Certainly, the circumstances are not the same, but I think we have to continue the fighting. And now this is part of the legacy. The second thing, we have to think to document our own fighting, because if not, we have to reinvent bicycle. But bicycle has been invented yet. But we have to continue to document our own fighting. In this sense, there is a transmission. There is a legacy, what people have done before, and you continue the combat.
Please, yes.
A luta continua.
Actually, we're just going to switch the mic, actually, just because there's a bit of a feedback. So if you just want to put that down, we'll give you that one.
On that note, France, saying a luta continua, Amilcar Cabral.
Yes.
And I want to say, and I'm going to say this because I'm 80, so
I didn't saw that, but some
but we're not done. We're not done. We're not done. So we're just going to continue. We're dedicated.
And with our banners, and we went till the top and then came down.
What do you want these universities to do?
I think they should totally divest.
Sorry, we're having a little bit of technical
their
difficulty.
investments. They should close.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So sorry, I believe you can continue. Oh, I think it has stopped. So sorry. Well, I can tee you up if you want.
Age-wise, but you know, and I continue to be involved intergenerationally because I think the young people.
Oh, we'll just have to.
Oh, so
yes,
sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah. Continue to be involved intergenerational because it brings such richness. The young people with their vision and their courage and their steadfastness, and then a little bit of wisdom. I say a little bit of wisdom and experience from the elders. So it really makes going forward very I wouldn't say pleasurable, but it makes the struggle stronger, for our coalition with the youth and with elders. And we're going to be around for a while. So hopefully, hopefully, touch wood, that's all I'm going to say. Legacy for me is what I've done. And I always confess that I'm not an archivist, but I could go by what I do. And then you have a questionnaire about oral history. So I got a lot of oral history, which I've imparted to a lot of people who are doing different research and so on.
Yes,
but and still going forward.
Okay, give us a few moments.
Test. Green dot. Okay.
Is that okay?
You guys just leave it
Does this, no, this one doesn't work? Okay.
Yeah, that one's good.
This one's good? No, not really.
Hello? Perfect.
This one is good, yeah.
This one's good as well. Well, speaking of fighting, that it's a constant conflict, I was wondering, Mr. Thomas, especially considering the longevity of all of your work and all of the legacies, my question to you is, how do you maintain your energy while fighting? Do you have any advice to give the youth who are taking up the mantle, who are fighting, but feel it might be burning out? Considering you have such a long legacy, how do you prevent that? Or what do you suggest?
I hope I'm not misquoting Alice Walker. Is it sure it's Mike? No?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I'm sure, I hope I'm not misquoting Alice Walker, but you know, she said that racism, by which I think she means oppression, injustice as well, is like weeds. You better keep pulling them up or they'd stifle what you wish to cultivate. So I know that as long as I'm alive, I am going to have to fight, because the battle really, you know, it's not just that the people who oppress us are evil. It's just that that is part of human nature. And if you can extirpate human nature, that would be fine, but we can't. And so we have to be prepared to battle. One of the things that I feel is important is that we have to know ourselves, invest a great deal in knowing who we are, and cultivating a huge amount of tolerance and patience for the people we work among. I said earlier on that if it were today, I would not have left QBB, because in leaving, really, you're not working with your fellow human beings to create change. And so oftentimes when we encounter foibles in others, we tend to push them aside or we close off. And for me, nowadays anyway, I use that as an opportunity to reflect on my own self and my own foibles that may very well alienate other people. And so those are helpful exercises, I think, as we combine our efforts to battle the evils that beset us. That's mostly what I can say to today's generation, because you're going to have to fight. There is just, you can't get away from it. When I first arrived here, we fought for employment. You know, I was astonished. I remember when I arrived, I'd go to the bank and every employee there was white. I went to the supermarket, every employee was white. I went to look for a job. As a clerk, I was offered a job, a manual job, you know, in shipping, and so on and so forth. And one decision I did make, and I'm not advising you to do that, but I made this decision to be true to myself. I vowed I would never work for a capitalist enterprise. I made that decision when I was 22, and I went off and studied psychiatric nursing and eventually went into teaching. It's complex, of course, because of the world we live in, but I suppose if you have to work in a capitalist structure, make sure you don't shed your humanity as well, you know, because it can push you to do that. Alas, alas. We mentioned what's going on south of the border, and I watch and I look at
all these Blacks who are on the Trump train. And I think of comments like shithole countries and the ads for the Central Park 5 and the discrimination in housing that Trump engaged in and so on and so forth. One of his employees saying that he did not want, she had a Black employee, prospective Black employee, and he said to her, what is he doing here? We don't want that type here. And people know all of that stuff. And they must know. I don't see how they cannot know. And yet they're on the train. And let's face it, we are going to meet a lot of people who sell their souls, and we're going to have to learn how to deal with them and still extend the hand of friendship, solidarity, because after all, we're human beings. I guess I'm speaking here now like a writer, but you know, that's pretty much in my jumbled way all that I can say on the subject.
No, it's really great advice, especially because of these systems, like you said, capitalism really does push you to give up all resemblance of humanity, and those strategies of how do we keep preserving that. And you find that in community and being with others and doing that work together. It's thank you. It's great advice. And I'm wondering, Brenda, if you have any advice, Miss Brenda, on how to fight, any strategies, especially with what's going on outside today. It would be great to get some notes.
Well, you know, I think it starts with the self. You know, we have to maintain our own mental health, physical health. That comes into play because you have to stay strong as a human being, you know. But I would say, like, looking at the elders that we are today, somehow or the other, although it was very hard for our grandparents, our parents, great-grandparents, it was hard, but they somehow had a structure. They kind of knew what was supposed to be and what wasn't supposed to be. They faced enormous racism and didn't have opportunities that we have today. But somehow, like, they had the church, which is another story. We won't talk about the church in itself, but they had a community from the church. They had some built-in support systems, so to speak, that were predetermined. Of course, we've gotten rid of some of those norms because some of them weren't very good for all of us. But still, and when you fast forward today is really complex in terms of survival of self, because you have to have a group of people that you identify that you can fight together with. But I'm really big on trauma, that you have to deal with those things. Emotional intelligence. I think I would do a PhD in emotional intelligence, things like, you know, how you handle things before, how you handle things today, because there's a lot of resistance from all without, you know, just so much resistance to maintain your own integrity and your own conviction. So that's hard in itself, you know, just to survive in itself. Young people have challenges. You no longer can stay at a job for 25 years. You know, you have to recreate yourself. And I've got people in my family or people that I know. I talked to a young fellow yesterday, and he was saying his regime, he gets up at 3 a.m. and he meditates and he does certain things so that he will keep himself in order. Never mind what he does after that, you know, but just to keep himself. And it's so important to look after self. And then family, you know, a lot of us, I would say, compromise family because you're out there doing, family is compromised a whole lot. And when you look at, I always look at well, I don't always, but I did take a minute to look at the white, like, let's say white men, they would always preserve their family. As Black people, we don't have that privilege, or we would be just out there at all costs, sort of thing. And a lot of the times, because our community and our family have suffered over the time from slavery and then going forward, as to either whether it's having 3 jobs to survive because we're at the bottom of the totem pole, or whether it's involvement, because it always takes that extra. And it impacts on your family, which impacts on the community, which impacts on the future. So it's really complex, and able to stabilize yourself as young people, stabilize yourself, have an income, feel good about yourself, maintain the convictions, do the proper readings, and have the support. Most of all, you know, support is really, really, really important. And it's not easy to get. It's not easy to get people of like mind who will actually value what you're doing, encourage you in developing a network of people of like mind that you know have your back kind of thing, you know. So whether it could be all Black or it could be other peoples that you coalesce with, you know, but really having that support to go forward in this world so that you can look after your economic being, your health well-being, your mental well-being, and then continue to be dedicated to the fight, you know.
Absolutely. Emotional intelligence is something that, yeah, you got to strengthen as you're going into the fight and as you're continuing the fight.
In a holistic way.
Absolutely.
I will try to express myself in French because it will be easier for me to explain some ideas. First of all, je comprends très bien ce que Brenda a souligné, c'est-à-dire nous sommes dans un monde aujourd'hui en Occident, dans un monde où l'individu est au centre de la vie. Nous venons, peut-être nous qui sommes un peu plus vieux, ou beaucoup plus vieux, dans un monde où il y avait des structures d'organisation. Les luttes étaient pour affirmer non seulement nos identités, mais les luttes essaient pour obtenir des droits. Parce que nous n'avions pas de droits. Vous oubliez, c'est-à-dire l'abolition de l'esclavage, c'est à peine une centaine d'années, 150 ans. Mon grand-père, il est né en 1864. C'est-à-dire, s'il était né aux États-Unis, il aurait pu naître esclave. Donc, il y avait des structures d'organisation, d'affirmation, et comme tu l'as souligné, les églises jouaient un rôle important, du moins dans les communautés anglophones ici. Dans d'autres communautés, c'était l'adhésion à des religions afro-américaines traditionnelles, le vaudou, la santeria, qui ont joué un rôle important en termes de renforcement identitaire, mais aussi, il y a un phénomène qui me semble extrêmement important. C'est-à-dire, vous êtes, vous, comme nous l'avions été quelque peu, des privilégiés. Des privilégiés dans le sens que vous êtes des étudiantes, vous êtes des étudiants, et donc, quelque part, il y a cette coupure qui s'est faite justement avec les restes des communautés. C'est-à-dire le docteur Bartley, si je me rappelle bien, où il y avait des gens qui étaient là, à travers certaines organisations, avaient maintenu ces liens, que ce soit dans les communautés anglophones, que ce soit dans les communautés haïtiennes. Les premiers groupes organisés l'ont été par des activistes qui étaient aussi des fois des universitaires, des étudiants, qui eux-mêmes avaient maintenu des liens avec les communautés les plus défavorisées. Aujourd'hui, il me semble que quelque part, il y a des fois des coupures entre des étudiants du monde universitaire, je parle de minorités, des minorités noires, avec les préoccupations de la grande majorité de nos communautés, alors qu'auparavant, il y avait des liens, je dirais, organiques entre des communautés, soit d'immigrants, soit des gens qui venaient, soit des gens qui étaient déjà installés, que ce soit à travers les églises, que ce soit à travers les organisations communautaires. Il me semble que nous, aujourd'hui, et que vous avez une responsabilité par rapport à ceux qui sont moins lotis, par rapport à ceux et celles qui n'ont pas eu cette opportunité d'aller dans les universités. Il y a un autre facteur qui me semble important, c'est que nous rentrons dans une ère, et vous savez, quand les gens font des discours, ça a été la même chose dans les années 30, quand les nazis faisaient leurs discours, les fascistes, des fois on disait c'est pas possible, ils ne vont pas exécuter. Or, aujourd'hui, nous voyons, on n'avait qu'à regarder les manifestations dehors, nous voyons la montée de la barbarie. Nous voyons le retour, que ce soit sur les questions d'avortement de l'autre côté de la frontière, que ce soit sur les problèmes vis-à-vis des minorités, nous voyons aujourd'hui des discours que beaucoup de gens pensaient impossibles. Les gens disaient, bon, c'est terminé, c'est un monde où ça ne reviendra pas. On le voit, et tu l'as mentionné tout à l'heure, il a suffi qu'un député mentionne sur la question du racisme à l'Assemblée nationale. Il a dû lui-même faire amende honorable, il est attaqué de partout. On voit que quelque part, il y a des notions, quand vous les abordez, et on a le risque réel, on n'est pas immune à la montée de l'extrême droite que l'on voit partout dans le monde occidental. Et aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on doit tenir compte que rien n'est acquis. C'est-à-dire qu'il va falloir continuer à lutter pour ce que nous pensions qui allait, dans un futur proche, disparaître. Et je crois que dans ce sens, ce que nous essayons ici peut-être de dire, c'est que we have to keep fighting. Parce que moi, j'aurais bien aimé m'occuper de mes petits-enfants seulement, and not to get involved with all these kind of problems, to take my time to write my own stuff. But we live in a world where today we have to keep fighting.
You want to go? Okay. I would say, so when I was nominated to the STM, the board of the STM, the board of directors, and I thought, well, for once, I'm going to have a little break. I'm going to go, it's an area that I don't know about. I'm going to learn about the wheels and everything. And I no sooner got there when the security guards at the metro were harassing Black people. So there were 7 people on the board who elected officials, and 2 were from represented the users. I was one of them, and the other one was a handicapped person. So I no sooner get there and I sit down and I'm going to have a break and I'm going to just study this. And they say, we have to create a committee, ethnic and social diversity committee, and Brenda Paris will be the president. And I go, oh. And I go, oh my goodness. But so at first it was really hard because the senior, I hope I can take a minute to say this, but this is a real example. So the senior managers were not happy. And I'm there, actually, I'll just back up a little bit. When I went on the board, one of the city councilors said, you know, when you came, you were like this. And it's true. I mean, you know, you don't have agency as you go along. Even I was a big person, but you don't have agency. After a few years, they had to shut me up a little bit, but you know, you go in like that. So the senior managers anyway, with the notion of having somebody there that's going to advocate for more Black people to be in the ranks of the STM, which is an 8,000 to 9,000 member force, you know, a workforce, and to institute and to not infiltrate, but to get hired by the different levels in the STM, because up to then, even their own person said, if we keep hiring our sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts and neighbors and everything, it'll remain white. And this is a white person who said that. So this committee that was formed, little by little, I had to meet with the senior managers became part of the team. And over time, I have to say, they did get accustomed to the idea that maybe other peoples were going to come into their ranks. And I have to say, when I get on the bus today, which I take public transport all the time, I will say, not because of me, but because there was this change of direction and movement. But I did, as a president of the Ethnic and Social Diversity Committee, which I was there for 2 mandates, which is 8 years. And wow. It was, yeah, it was grueling, but it was effective. And it was the best times, well, not having fun, but meaningful. And actually there was a lot of respect that came with it. Because of the rank, a respect came with it. Well, I didn't always get that, you know, no matter where you worked. But so it's one of those things that, so that's the legacy too, you know, that's a legacy that I can talk about all the time. And here at Concordia, there's a group called Harambic that's to do with feminism. So it's a feminist, Black feminist organization that was founded about a year ago. I don't know if you all know about it, but if you want to join it, they're happy to have you. And so I'm on the board of the Harambek, which is an offshoot of the Simone de Beauvoir Institute, which is longstanding part of Concordia. But Harambek is about 1.5 years, I think, in creation, right? Yeah. So
I just want to add, last year, the city of Montreal asked me to vote about 4 people, Black people who contribute to the city. And one of them, you know, when you go to the old Montreal, that Mr. Bonhomme, fortunately, is alive. He was alive. He's still alive. But he was the first one in the 50s who organized the first arrangement for the city, for the old city of Montreal, who make some decision. He was the first urban planner in Montreal, but it takes more than 70, 60 years to recognize his work for Montreal. But because also in Montreal now you have some minority people who were elected in the city, not because they didn't recognize for a long time in the police force the first Black policeman in 1974. They didn't recognize the work of Viviane Duchesne, who works on diversity. You know, that it takes, fortunately, most of the people except Edouard were alive. But Mr. Bonhomme, he made some great change in Montreal. He built the first building for poor people. Wow. 12,000. But they forgot all what is done for the city. And it takes maybe more than 60 years to recognize his work. And so I said, this is legacy and fighting.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, all 3 of you, for sharing the wealth of information you have. It's like talking to an encyclopedia, I find. I'm like, what? It's always a pleasure. And so I would love to open up the floor to questions for people who also are very, very interested in learning more about the knowledge that you have and hold and your wisdom. And so I'm not sure how we would like to go about it. We have Doug.
Oh yeah, I'll just jump in. Also, if anyone's on Zoom that has any questions, if you pop those into the chat, we can read them out. You could also raise your virtual hand and then you could turn on your mic and ask us. Those of you here in the space, if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring a microphone over to you.
Who would like to start first? I can continue going because I have quite a bit, but.
Oh, here's one.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess this is more a question or comment for the organizers and also for the panel. I think one of the things that comes out of this is kind of a raw honesty that we have to face as people that are involved in social justice or in contestation. How do we actually have the real ongoing conversation? I know Frantz said that every Monday there's something going on at CIDIHCA, but how do we actually have this ongoing conversation where there's a real interface between the younger generation and the older generation? One thing that to really keep in mind, which is super important, is an observation that Dorothy Williams made, and I hope somebody can correct me or maybe properly articulate it. It's that one of the tricks in the history of Montreal has always been that with every generation, the younger generation has this kind of step up, but then there's a schism between the younger and older generation. It's one of the existing, if you read all of Dorothy Williams' works, she notices that every generation, the younger generation comes up, doors are open for them, but then there's almost like an erasure of the older generation. There's a schism that exists at the heart of our community. And I'm just wondering, organizers of here, panelists, where can we have this ongoing platform so that there can really be an accompagnement, a kind of a mentorship that exists?
I just say, James, can you introduce yourself as James Oscar? just introduce yourself briefly.
My name is James Oscar. I'm a curator and a, what else do I do? Curator and a writer. Recently, I ironically went to the city. My mom didn't understand what I was doing, but I was preparing for probably 6 months. And then at the last minute, really shaping it up. Just an example of how scary the situation is right now in the city. And I think it comes out of the schism. Around 10 days ago, the city had a meeting, a public audition, where people could come forward and actually give their opinion on the new cultural policy that was being made. And I swear to God, over the course of 5 days, there's not one person who spoke on our issues, on the future of culture in the city. So I work also on that, yeah.
It seems to me, sorry, may I?
Please,
yeah.
of course.
It seems to me, James, that you're identifying a problem, and perhaps maybe you might want to initiate some sort of a way in which let's say the seniors in the community can actually interact with the younger people. Perhaps it just seems to me what you're saying is that no such situation exists, and perhaps you might want to think about creating something like that.
But throwing the question back at him?
Yeah.
Okay, quick.
Yeah.
Well, I would say into that, for instance, there's a young gentleman, Fimo Mitchell, who some of you might know, who has a group called When the Village Meets, meditation and yoga. There again, I'm on the board, but as an elder. And then I belong to what is it? Anyway, CIDIHCA. That's a seniors group. But nowadays, when I belong to something, it's sort of as an elder, I mean, officially. So that bridge in my milieu, or in our milieu, in the community, kind of play that role of interfacing with the young and the old. So I know there's a schism and an erasure and all that, but we continually have to work on it and just make sure that our presence is felt. As you said, you have the money, it's a start. We can only do so many things, and we're only so many people, right? So you can only do so much, but try and inculcate your wisdom, as you said, and with their experience and where their enthusiasm in any sphere that we appear, Yeah.
I will admit that part of the problem belongs to the older generation. I honestly admit that we haven't really created the spaces for people to come and chat with us. So I have tried, but my thing is literary and so on. So, but I think this needs to be a much broader cultural situation. There are things that go on, but they go on, they work in silos. The young people do their thing in various associations. And that said, I'm not altogether absolutely sure that this is totally correct, because I look at the island organizations in which both the young and the old, it's true, the generally administration, the executives in the island organizations tend to be older people, but the work that goes on between the younger and older people is always carried out. So, it just really depends on where your focus is. The problem becomes different depending on where you focus. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think, James, you are right. We have to do more and more. That's to bring younger people, younger generation with the older generation. I remember when we have this exhibit in front of Ellard's Gallery, it was very interesting that we have an exhibit with the first generation of Haitian writers who arrived in Quebec in 1965. And when this idea was great, that to mix the groups died years ago. There is only one survivor. Mr. Phelps is 96 years old, but the idea was to bring the young generation of poets to read during the vernissage the poems of the old generation. That's but it's one example, but I think we need, and the organization, the community organization, university student association, all of us has a work to do. That this kind of events is very interesting. That's mixed activities between the younger generation and the older generation, because not only it's necessary for the transmission, but also my understanding it's after January the 28th, we will be in a beginning of a new world, in a beginning, and not only in the US, but also all over the world. And we just look at the people Mr. Trump has nominated. And all of us, I think we need to think how to organize resistance for the next years.
Mr. Voltaire, I just wanted to get a bit more details on that weekly meetup you mentioned. Where is it? How do people sign up for it?
You can go on the website, but CIDIHCA.com, but also you can call us. We are in the old base in the old Montreal, 430 Sainte-Hélène. We have a library, 30,000 books on the Caribbeans, on slavery, on blacks, on art. We have also, maybe today the photothèque is 30,000 pictures, beginning with the night 1867. We have access, and its access is free. We publish also academic journal of Haitian history. And so, we have archives. For example, George Anglade, Max Dorsainville was teaching at McGill, and we have some archives. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. You can work if you want to work with us as researchers. A lot of people come, and we have a lot of people. Maybe last year we have 20 people who came from Europe to work for 15 days, 1 month as postdoctoral or doctoral students. I think it's necessary to bring all these people together. Desiree Rocha, who used to work with us, sometimes ago, we worked on a small program at McGill. We publish a small books and an exhibit on 30 years of Caribbean presence in Montreal. And we give it for free all over because it was bilingual. We give it for free for all organizations and activists, that they can have a synthesis of work of what has been done for the last 30 years in the community. But I think we need to, I think we have in a situation very different. When I arrived here, we were 4,000 people, Asian people. There was small communities. We need each other. We know each other. But today we are talking about 200,000 people. And so we have to think how to reorganize our own relationship. We can't act as in the 60s or in the 70s, where we know each other. Today, it's a very different world. And so we need to, but you have the instruments, technical instruments to get in contact or get in touch each other. I think we have to participate in the Black History Month, participate in the Week Against Racism, participate in exhibit, support. And I think it's important that we deal also with the political system. When I ask my Haitian fellows that, you know, we have a problem in Haiti, but you don't see like people mobilizing for Palestine. We don't see that. You know, we don't see any one of us. Sometimes I'm talking about there is a lot of problem in Africa. We don't see the people get involved. While years ago, we thought that what is happening in Africa concern all of us. And we need that. We need what happened in the US with Afro-Americans, what happened in Afro-Brazilian. We have to get concerned because we are concerned. And so I think we need now to think what will happen to us. And I said us all over the world. It can be, we saw that in Brazil. I was in Brazil just after Bolsonaro, and we see that during the Bolsonaro regime, what they have done during the Lula time was completely changed. They expel people from universities. And, you know, we have to think what will happen to us in the sense that we can say, okay, we live here, nothing will happen to us here. No.
That we have to have a diasporic approach to our struggles. You know, unity is strength, and we have to look at the world. We're all intertwined, and that's the way we have to go. But you know, one thing I hear a lot is, oh, young people aren't doing anything. Young people are individualistic, and young people are just. I personally really believe in young people. Hence, they're outside there now. They're all over the place doing work with the environment. They're doing in high schools, and I don't know the ratio of, you know, in terms of aggregated research in terms of Black and whites and so on. But I know that the next generation, there's a sizable amount who are really engaged in doing things, you know. So passing the baton and having them like intergenerational, that we work together, you know, I just feel very confident that people are, it doesn't happen automatically. We have to work on it, of course. We have to work at it. We have to see where we can do better, where we can do more, and so on and so forth. So I hear it.
Sorry to contradict you, Brenda, but but you know, is this working?
It's working.
Young people, being young is you have the world in front of you to explore. So you can't really, maybe we expect too much of our young people. That's, you know, I don't know. Because I mean, I just see all that is out there and getting to know oneself, that whole business of the journey into the self, it's complex, you know, and people do have to go off into all sorts of areas. And I have a tendency to want to give them a pass. You know? There are those people. Remember, revolutions are always done by a handful of people, and then you know, they lead, and a whole lot of other people. We convince a whole lot of other people to follow. You know, so hopefully those leaders will come forward and follow. You know, yeah.
My bad, I'll stand up. Thank you for the lecture. So I had a quick question. I was just the address of the library for the archives with the Black people reading Haitian history. And then you did mention something about interrogation of humanity. So I had a quick question for you in the sense that you've all gone through different experiences back in the 60s with systematic racism, with racism itself. So going through those experiences, would you define what's the difference between interrogation of humanity and interrogating human nature? Because I feel like to all of you, because I think what's the difference between interrogation of humanity and the interrogation of human nature? Because human nature, I feel like it does lead to you are who you are, but at the same time, humanity is what you believe is true to you. That's what I believe in. So I feel like you cannot change people in that sense of way.
That's true.
But at the same time, you ask us to interrogate, how are we supposed to interrogate humanity without interrogating human nature?
By getting to know yourself, and hopefully sufficient knowledge to be able to have some sort of an approximate idea of others. But the task really does begin with yourself, because remember that you are part of the human species. And insofar as you're part of the human species, there's a hell of a lot that's in you that's also in the rest of human beings. So by getting to know yourself, you already begin to know a great deal about humanity. I often jokingly say that the exercise of getting to understand the vast array of human behavior, including depravity, begins with the study of our own family. You see all the problems and so on and so forth within our own family. And dealing with, and we begin as well to master how we deal with other people by dealing with those members of our family. It's that sort of thing that I'm talking about. But we can even go beyond and add to that through the many, many, many studies that we can read. I always say to people that when I came from the Caribbean, one of the very first books that I read that completely revolutionized my way of thinking was Faно's Black Skin, White Masks. After I read that book, I was a completely changed person, and I've continued to read similar books all the time. I just finished reading one yesterday, in fact, Viet Thanh Nguyen, Two Faces, and so on, his autobiography. Look, that's what I meant. Okay.
I can add, as an historian, until the end of the 19th century, most of the people, I'm talking about in the Western world, were thinking that we were not completely human. Let's remember the first pseudo-scientific, like Linné, Buffon, they just have some, Gobineau is after that, but when Gobineau wrote the inequality of human races, there was one anthropologist, Haitian anthropologist, who wrote a book that's to contradict Gobineau, de l'égalité des races humaines, the equality of the human race. We were in the 19th century, but this book was translated and the book was published in Paris. He was a member of the French Anthropological Association, but no one talked about this book, no one, until the 1990, where the book was translated in Spanish, in English, and republished in French. What I'm saying that during a lot of this period, when the world before the Second World War, we were not considered completely human. And I think it's Jean-Paul Sartre who said the monde was divided between, in the 20th century, between indigenous people and civilized people. And still, they maintain this kind of identification. I work with cartoons, and it's very interesting. A cartoon was published in the 1859. It was a Haitian head of state, and they published this cartoon, and they said in France, look, Suluk was a head of state. He lost the power. May we give him the kingdom in the Jardin des Plantes, where we have all the singe, well, we have all the monkeys, and it will be the king of the monkeys, but maybe 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, they published some cartoons in Belgium and in French where they portray Christiane Taubira, who was a French minister, as a monkey. And they said in the words that it's not an honor for the monkeys. They publish Obama and his wife as monkeys. What I'm saying that in the imaginary world of the Western world, we still are considered as subhumans. And you can see that with Balotelli, a football player in Italy. You can see that with a minister of culture in Italy who was Congolese. This is all this kind of representation for the last maybe 200 years. That's the concept and the imaginary Western world, that we are not human. Sometimes they say discrimination is cultural. It's not, but Africans and Black people not belongs completely to the world. If they accept today Japanese or Chinese, it's because of the transformation in Asia. And so we have to think about that. We have to think that we have a long fight to do, because it's part of the Western world, the construction of the white man. You know, there is no white. In fact, there is only human race. We know that. The problem that the racist doesn't know that. But in fact, we still maintain this vision that there are human race. Even, you know what genetics has told us. But the world is organized. If you ask someone here, anyone, any students, he defines himself as white. Said, what is white? Because this begins effectively in the Western Hemisphere, in the Atlantic world, in the 1915. Because before that, people defined themselves as Muslim, as Christians, but they never defined themselves by color. This was a construction, and when they organized with this construction, a structure, a hierarchical structure, where Blacks belongs to the last part of the world. And so we still are fighting this kind of vision of the world.
Just to ask you one more question, because you say that as an elder, you do not believe in our generation to be able to go out in the streets and advocate for ourselves. So what do you think as the young generation that we are missing? Because yes, we do put up a fight, as you've seen in the streets, but what do you think we are missing that was there back in the days that we do not have right now, that could just make it a fit even a little bit better to get what we would like to have for the people who are in the future too? Yeah.
Very interesting question.
I'm picking up the mic only because I can't answer that altogether, but I could just address it. I'll just come back to what I think. I'm more of the persuasion that you're not missing per se, but life has changed so much. And you know that whatever we say today, apparently other researchers, pundits, whatever say, the next 40 years is not going to be recognizable in terms of what we know. So we all have to reinvent ourselves, you know. But I do believe that there's a base of young people who are dedicated, convicted, and they do the research. You know, a lot of people are looking at their ancestry, are looking at BCRC, for instance, just did a book on Stand on the Shoulders and so on. A lot of people are doing, so you just have to make yourselves get involved. You know, there's no like magic thing about how to get involved, Usually when things get bad enough or when it's a crisis, people act. But I would say for the young generation, you really have to be proactive, because it's masked as to what's going to happen next. You know, I mean, it's obvious when Trump comes in and it's like Armageddon almost, but we can't look at life like that because it keeps going, right? Life is going to keep going. So you have to just each one teach one, we used to say, but each young person encourage another person to get involved and to do. That's all I can say. To talk about the worst, to have your own meetings, to have your own, not your own in isolation of the community, you know, but to have collective discussions, dialectics, we used to call it. We had a lot of community organization, meetings and so on, to talk and talk and talk about the issues. So just more of collective actions on the part of young people to give each other support to go forward, you know, I would say.
Actually, I think you're very well equipped to handle a lot of these the issues that come up. There is knowledge is at everybody's fingertips these days. I mean, I've learned so much just looking at YouTube channels. I mean, I recently saw a documentary about the horrors that Germany committed in Southwest Africa, now known as Namibia. And I didn't have that sort of material available to me 30, 40 years ago. You have all of that today. You can equip yourselves. You don't have to listen to racist white shit, pardon my expression, because you know you can contest that. You can shrug your shoulders to that. We had to try and educate, and while we were trying to educate these people who were laughing at us, you know what I mean? You don't have to take that. So you are equipped. What you have to do though, is you have to belong to larger groups so that when you have your battles, you know that you have soldiers. That's probably where you need to strengthen yourselves. And I'll give you a specific example in my particular case. I mentioned that earlier on, that woman who said that her students were behaving like a bunch of niggers. Well, I told my principal that she had to be fired. And he said no. And I said, well, if you don't fire her, I'll be leading these students in a walkout. But I knew, even though I wasn't on good terms with the QBB, I knew that the QBB was there to support me. Now, if I didn't know that, perhaps I would have hesitated. But of course, by 3 p.m. that day, she was terminated. And that's the sort of thing. You have to know that you have your soldiers, and you have to build that sort of connection.
Quick note, I heard a young Black person say, I don't know, out loud on the media, I am resolute in my dedication to moving social justice ahead. So we all have to, whatever age you are, have to be resolute and just go forward. Like you say, the social media allows us to have all kinds of information these days, but you have to be resolute in your own determination of what you want for this life to be, you know. And then, you know, I'm just going to add one other thing. What's her name? The rock star. What's her name? I have a block with her name. This is the one that's there now that had 6 shows and everything.
Taylor Swift?
Taylor Swift. Yeah, I can't even say her name. I can't say her.
Beyonce or?
I have a block. I swear I have a block. But I think that is as dangerous almost as Trump, that all these people, all these young people, and some old people too, would invest their money and time and their headspace. Because these people take their head and put it, you know, I heard somebody say, so since 3 years old, I've been idealizing this person. What kind of person is that in a society? What has she created? You know, she's created a parallel something or the other that has people's brains, you know. So hopefully, I mean, I'm sure there's Black people in there too, people of color, people of all kinds of things. But that to me is so dangerous of how you can brainwash and cult attitude as he had in politics, as he has in politics, created a cult. So we have a lot to combat in a sense.
The disinformation.
Yeah, combat in these days as well, and you can get easily sucked into untruths and all kinds of things. So it is more of a challenge, but it's of today. So what we did way back then, you can't do back today, but you can do part of it. You can do part of it, mostly being informed, being resolute, keeping your eyes wide open, and giving each other support. Helping. When you recognize somebody, just reach out to them, speak up more and that kind of thing. But people do speak up more these days. I do find you have a voice and you use it. I do find you have much more of a voice than before.
Great. We have another question coming up.
It's more point of clarification. First of all, thank you. I'd like to thank the panel for sharing the significant lived experiences of Montreal Black history. What I'd like, though, is some acronyms to be clarified. For instance, the QBBE, what does it mean? BCRC, what does that mean? And CIDIHCA, what do they mean? And what are the roles?
Well, QBBE is Quebec Board of Black Educators. And there are quite a few people in this room who actually know about that organization. They ran remedial classes in the summer schools, both for, well, they were remedial classes, but they were also regular classes in the summer for high school students and elementary school students. The Costa Hall was for the high school students, and Banner was for the elementary students. A great service to parents who didn't know what to do with their kids during the summer, but also an opportunity for kids who needed to catch up or make up for a course that they'd failed, etc., etc., etc. Yeah. They also ran tutorial programs during the regular school year.
CIDIHCA is an acronym in French. That's a Centre International de Documentation et d'Information Haïtienne, Caribéenne, et Afro-canadienne. Why this long name? Because we think that's, because at first we were in exile during the dictatorship of Duvalier, and we want to have, in 1983, a center who documents and who protect the patrimony, literary, historical of Haiti. But we think also Haiti is part of the Caribbean. And as migrants, we are part of Afro-Canadian. And for that reason, we don't think that you have a separate, different groups, but that to give, that people can understand, we've said Haitian, Caribbean, and Afro-Canadian. And international, because we think our world, in our world, like the Pan-Africanists of the time. If you look at some pictures, 19th century, Dubois. If you look at the picture in 1952 in La Sorbonne, where you have the first meeting of, before the independence, you have most of the people coming from the United States, the Caribbean, and Africa. That was first meeting, Pan-African meeting. When you look at in Rome in the 60s, you see also all this, the intellectuals from all over the Black world giving some unity of our fight. And if you look at what happened in 1960s here in Montreal for the Black writers, you have also not only Blacks coming from the Caribbean, but coming from Haiti, and we give a huge perspective on that. And I think our fight has to be local, provincial, national, and international.
Would you like to?
Okay.
Black Community Resource Center.
Yes, yes. And just to say that the Board of Black Educators is still alive and well, and the BCRC as well, yeah. I was privileged to be in 1974 at the 6th Pan-African Congress in Tanzania, which was the last of that nature, but I mean, other formations have taken place since then, but that was a pivotal moment which had the heads of state from the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, everywhere. It was overwhelming, as I must say. I was there and overwhelmed, but I was there as a national representative with Dorothy Wills, Josie Wallen, who's from Montreal. Dorothy Wills was here at the time, and we went as a small delegation to that conference, yeah, 1974, yes.
Great. Yes, a lot of acronyms. We definitely thank you so much for the clarification question. Do we have anyone else? We're just to let everyone know at 4:30, we do have some food and snacks at NULA Center, which is on the 7th floor, just across the street.
I'll just jump in there for a second there, Lisa, that we've changed a little bit the location of that. So you didn't get that note, but I did back here. It's going to happen in the Faubourg building, which is over on the corner of Guy and St. Catherine. But the best way to get there is we'll gather together at the door and go in as a group instead of NULA.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so that's going to be happening in a few minutes. So we still have room for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, we have one in the back and then one in the front.
Sorry, I missed the hands.
Yeah, raise your hand again.
Oh, there you go.
You can have more than one question. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the panel too. This was very interesting. My name is Lioness. I'm a Haitian Jamaican American student coming in. So you spoke about like structure when fighting against racism. And at one point, I think you mentioned churches and you're like, that's a whole different conversation. But for me, that like brought up like a thought process for me where I think a type of erasure that I think has become within our generations is that like the church, like Black gospel, all of those things, especially in particular with Christianity, that's been a bit lost in our society right now. And I feel like at this moment, we have kind of like lost a bit, like as Black people, religion in our pursuits of fighting against racism. So my question was, do you feel like that has had like a pivotal impact on how we've approached, approaching like a more welcoming environment for all minorities? Or do you think that we need to go back to a moment where we have like a higher sense of purpose and a higher sense of like a being that's above us to guide us into that's my question.
I hear young people especially talking about spirituality, in that sense, as opposed to going to church and so on, but that still plays a role. The Union United Church, oldest Black church in Canada, still is, alive and well. There's some people in here who go regularly and support it and so on. So it has a role, but I mean, it's waning, it is waning. So Christianity or spirituality is, takes on different forms. That's all I can say. But I understand what you're saying. Something outside of yourself in a way, right? Yeah, outside of yourself that you can believe in and have, contain values and not doctrines, but values that can guide you. So there is a bit of a gap there, but I find that younger people especially, talking about spirituality and coming from inside, as opposed to out.
Wow. The church and others, I belong to the LGBTQ community, and I have to say Christianity has not been kind to people like me. I certainly consider myself to be a humanist, and I do support churches, a couple of churches actually. I do, strangely enough, I have written a novel in which I really trash Methodism, but I do send money to the Methodist Church in St. Vincent because of the good work that it does in the community. I think I spent about 4 months attending Union United Church. After I read Fano, that was over. But I supported Scholarship Fund, as Yvonne Gray could probably attest. I think the church as an institution does very good things, but it alienates a lot of us. And so really my concern would be about ethics, humanism, and there's probably where I put my focus. And for me, it's more the golden rule: do unto others as you would like them do unto you, you know, and that's it, and so on. But, you know, that would be my answer. I mean, I don't really want to belong to an organization that looks down on me, so to speak. And I find that that tends to be a problem in Black churches, including Union United.
I'm not a religious person. I don't belong to any religious organization. But what I'm seeing in the Haitian community or in the Cuban community, for the last 10 years, you have now a lot of Afro-American, I can say Afro-Americans global, Voodoo, Santeria. And the very interesting thing, that this organization are open to LGBT, are open because they think they are not Catholic, neither Protestant, because the story of the Black church in the US or here, it's another story. We can talk too much about that today, but that's very interesting that people rediscover traditional religious group. They try to not only to silence the presence of these groups during the colonial times, but also they ostracize them. So that and so these people have survived because they survive in clandestinity. They survive in Cuba, they survive in Haiti, in Brazil, and these are religious groups who are open in the sense that, you know, because they don't have a problem if you are Christian. And for Louis, that the Christian was the problem, that the Muslim we have a problem, but they don't have any problem. You know, that reminds me what had happened in Rome. You have still a place where you have all the gods here, and even you have one place, an empty space where they said the unknown God. That in the sense that they are here, they transform themselves in spirituality that people need in this globalization process to recognize where they come from. A lot of the people who get involved in the Afro-American religion, and I'm talking about Afro-American to be global, you know, Voodoo, Santeria, Macumba, because the people discover their own spirituality and that they belongs to religious groups who came from Africa. We survive in some countries because of this creed. We survive because they help the people transcend their condition, the slavery condition. And they try to have repression against all these religious groups, but we survive.
I just had a sort of a footnote to that. The spiritual Baptists in my own native St. Vincent, who held the soul, I would say, the African soul intact throughout the years of slavery and abject colonialism. Yeah.
And what, sorry?
The spiritual Baptists. I said that held the society, the soul of the, well, actually, I would say the Black laboring classes, because, you know, you in those societies, you had the plantocrats, a tiny middle class that were generally colonial servants and the rest of the people were just laborers on the plantations. Well, those laborers on the plantations, they kept their dignity. The spiritual Baptist religion ensured the dignity of these people. There was where they could, in fact, worship in an African way, you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. We can stay here for, I think, at least a few more hours to get through what we just talked about. So we unfortunately only have 5 minutes left. And so I really wanted to end it with you three. Do you have any last words of wisdom or advice to give these youth as we close off this session?
Continue the process of self-knowledge. That's all I can say. Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe you could give us some back at you kind of thing. Wisdom, I say, and spirit and and go forward, you know, but be strong and be positive. You know, positive thinking goes a long, 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 long way. And I actually, the theme of When the Village Meets with Maguy Metellus, he started a retreat a couple of years ago, which I was a part of. And the theme is Out for Joy. And when I first heard it, I thought it was, well, that's kind of frivolous. But then once we got into it and looked at the writers and the scholars and everybody's lived experiences, it makes sense that we have to have some joy in life. We just cannot go forward and be just depressed all the time. Now, mental health, I was at a meeting yesterday with this Dr. Jarvis, who does first episode psychosis. I mean, that's real. Mental health is real. But at the same time, those of us that can and can help others, creating joy for yourself is almost not a privilege. It's just a right, and it goes along with eating and sleeping and so on and so forth. So we have to arm ourselves with these tools in order to go forward, you know. So that's what I have.
And participate in activities in the Black community, because there is a lot of activities in the Black community. If you look at what happened during the Black History Month, during the Week Against Racism, continue to participate, get involved in any kind of activities. It can be a soccer club, it can be a hockey Black club, you know, participate, get involved, and in this time, get ready for fight, because we will need soldiers in the next years.
Thank you so much. I have no words on how to close this off. It's quite difficult. So in the end, we thank you so much for taking the time, and really we're taking a step forward and really bridging the gaps and sharing stories and really having that intergenerational exchange. And thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, and also thank you everyone for coming in to Space today. Thank you to our translators hiding in the back there. Just to let everyone know online, we will be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but this conversation does remain available on our YouTube channel. You should revisit it and share it from there. And everyone else here in the space and anyone listening has got, so we are all going to gather together and move over to the Fulberg 10th floor and continue this conversation. All right, thank you.